Greetings! Honestly, I first got to know the Japanese game industry through the Dark Souls series, if I remember correctly. Then I found out about the Resident Evil series, and here we go. Japanese games are famous for their unique gameplay, stories, and for their beautiful soundtracks. In these games, something happens that might seem weird for American or European players. Of course, the listed games don't contain anything too bizarre, except for cases when, like in Resident Evil 4 Remake, Leon performs a backflip instead of stepping back from a chainsaw. But what does it matter if it looks cool? Aside from these mainstream games, there are projects designed for the Japanese domestic market. These games have some differences comparing to others. As a rule, many players don't like such games and they end up being ignored from the very beginning because of their specific game design. Today's game, NieR Automata, is also a Japanese game. In its time, Automata made quite a splash. I avoided this game for a long time because I thought it attracted players only because of scantily clad androids. When the hype died down, I decided to find out what the game is really like. Before watching the video, don't forget to grab something to eat. If you're ready, let's get started. The core of any action game is the gameplay, and I have some questions about the game in this regard. Let's take it slowly and in order. NieR Automata presents itself as a slasher with a focus on a melee combat. The player is given the opportunity to slay enemies using the genre standard heavy and light attacks. Players who are used to these kinds of games expect a well-developed combat system with various combos, but NieR lacks combos, except for alternating between light and heavy attacks. For slasher fans, this is a big minus. In slashers, mastering combos is a major thing. The player memorizes them and then picks and performs these combos during a fight without hesitation, essentially creating the action themselves. Such games are called character action games. Developers give the player a deep combat system where you can combine various attacks without giving enemies a respite, resulting in non-stop action enhanced by special effects. In these games, you can create action without exploring the combat system's combos. However, there are cases where the action is not driven by the player but is scripted by the developers in advance. NieR Automata doesn't fall into either category. The combat system boils down to the fact that you just click on opponents, periodically dodging their attacks. It doesn't provide much satisfaction because you just need to drain the opponent's health using only light and heavy attacks without any changes throughout the game. We also have a pod, a drone with ranged attacks which has a special powerful attack that can be swapped. But it doesn't add anything to the combat system, it just speeds up the fight or helps reach flying enemies. The fun begins when you accidentally wander into a high-level area, or you find yourself under-leveled for a story mission. I remember a side quest involving a combat machine that was level 40, 20 levels higher than mine. To beat it, I spent 30 minutes running circles around it trying to dodge its attacks. What's worse, boring fights become even longer and there is little room for error. Since enemies deal so much damage, a 30-minute fight can be over in a second because of one mistake forcing you to start all over again. Regardless, it's still better when you can beat a location while underleveled, even if it takes more time to finish. Actually, I did see an attempt to diversify the gameplay. There was a boss in the middle of the game with attacks in the second phase that sent you into a hacking menu. There, you had to dodge projectiles flying at you and destroy the core in the center. And I have only one question. Why didn't the developers use this mechanic further or evolve it somehow? As a result, this uncommon mechanic turned out to be underutilized. The only unique mechanic that could have diversified the gameplay was used for only one boss fight. Speaking of boss fights, they're just as tedious as the common encounters. Some bosses you fight on foot, using your swords and pots. These boss fights drag on forever and it feels like you're just chipping away at massive health bar. However, for large bosses like Goliath, the flight unit comes into play. You'd think fighting a boss in a flight unit would sound cool. Flying around, dodging projectiles and using powerful attacks to take down a giant machine. But in reality, these fights are long and uninteresting. Aside from the boss itself, you just fight ordinary enemies without any variety in their attacks or patterns. Every boss fight involving the flight unit follow roughly the same scenario. These bosses, which are large not only in size but also in their health bars, you just aim at a single point and hold down the firing button until their health reaches 0. Even the bosses themselves don't test your reactions, you just need to move slightly to the side to avoid their projectiles. In defense of these boss fights, however, I should mention that even though they are boring to play, there are well-staged cutscenes between phases that somehow dilute this so interesting combat. Amidst all this, there is one positive point that stood out to me. While you're playing and moving through certain sections, the camera suddenly shifts angles. So instead of a third-person action game, you get a 2D platformer with a side view. Sometimes it even switches to a top-down perspective. It's a pretty interesting mechanic. While it can be inconvenient at times, it at least breaks the monotony. It forces you to look at the world differently and introduces some variety to both exploration and combat. Also, a very important point in the gameplay is character progression. Even if the developers couldn't create an interesting combat system, they could have added various abilities or upgrades for annihilating enemies, something that could carry the whole combat system on its own. After all, in Final Fantasy XVI, which has a similarly boring combat system where everything is built around abilities, the game looks colorful and spectacular thanks to special effects. Well, it's pretty sad here too. Let's take it in order. There are no specific abilities for 2B, except for the drone's powerful attacks. Instead, there is a specific way of upgrading the character. We have a certain number of slots that can be expanded. In these slots, you can equip upgrade chips, which in turn provide various bonuses. You will encounter upgrade chips everywhere, after boss fights, after common fights, or you can buy them from a merchant. Different chips take up a different number of slots, depending on their power. However, these chips don't provide anything interesting. There are only passive bonuses like a 10% damage increase or a 3% speed increase, just a boring increase in stats. These chips don't really change anything. The most you can squeeze out of this kind of upgrade is reducing a fight from 5 minutes to 4. To make the combat system more engaging, the developers could have added active skills, similar to what the creators of Stellar Blade did. Even though most aspects of Stellar Blade were borrowed from NieR Automata, its combat has its own issues. The combos don't really work because you can cancel your attacks to defend yourself. If an enemy strikes while you're mid-combo, you're stuck in the animation and forced to take the hit without any chance to parry or dodge. However, the core of the gameplay is the active skill progression, and that actually works. I mean, throughout the game you're constantly upgrading the character and unlocking new abilities. This could make leveling up actually feel meaningful, giving you that sense of satisfaction. You'd know that unlocking a new ability which could completely change your playstyle or give you a spectacular move to annihilate enemies effectively. Probably I should mention that you can change your main weapons, but it doesn't really change anything because I beat the game using only the 2 starting weapons. Of course, I upgraded them to the maximum level if level 3 is indeed the max. Throughout the game, I didn't feel any difficulty or encounter any obstacles using these weapons. I want to point out that using different weapons change your moveset, which can add some variety to the gameplay. Now that we've discussed the combat system and character progression, we should talk about what actually motivates you to use these mechanics. Of course, story missions are the primary driving force, but there are also side quests to consider. Side quests don't offer anything new to the gameplay either. They're monotonous, usually requiring you to fetch something or kill a specific target. There are even worse quests like races or time trial combat challenges, which seem to exist only to fill the game with filler content. In terms of story, they're not anything special. I guess they're meant to be local stories that flesh out the lore, showing how androids and machines lived before you arrived. These side quests are scattered across the entire map and they are marked with red points. This brings me to my issues with the open world. It feels empty with no interesting activities besides these side quests. Of course, this open world is filled with mobs of machines that respawn after a while. However, this is more annoying than enjoyable. You just want to run past them rather than fight them. What exactly is supposed to motivate me to explore these locations? Take the desert location, for example. It's massive, but hollow. There is absolutely nothing to explore and nothing to do besides side quests. Yet sometimes the story missions send you back to this desert several times. Even then you only encounter NPCs who say a few words and nothing more. I never felt like the world had been alive before my arrival. I've talked about the side quests, the open world and the gameplay, but I haven't said a word about the story itself. I don't live in a bubble, even though I hadn't played any games by these developers before. I'd heard about Yoko Taro's creations, at least the Drakengard series. I expected something worthwhile. To give some context, once upon a time there were people on Earth. They created androids to defend themselves. Then one day aliens invaded. Using machine life forms they almost destroyed humanity. Some survivors escaped to the moon and created Project YoRHa. The goal was to reclaim Earth for humanity by sending combat androids down to destroy the machines. I don't want to delve too deep, so let's look at it superficially. To be honest, I didn't quite get the plot. The premise is engaging enough and our goal remains the destruction of thoughtless machines. But we soon see that machines possess something like consciousness, some even become peaceful. Later we encounter a deserter android, A2, who betrayed YoRHa for some reason, but after that encounter she isn't even mentioned again. Finally, the ending, our partner NieR gets infected with a virus while hacking the final boss. 2B has to kill him because his corrupted data can be synced to the bunker. It turns out he transferred his consciousness into a machine, so he survives and the game ends there. I was left asking, what the hell is that? Why did it end like this? What about the machines? What will YoRHa do next? It feels like the game shouldn't have ended there, or at least these questions should be answered in a sequel, which doesn't exist. So, what do we have in the end? In my view, it's a mediocre game in almost every aspect. It fails to provide anything new or even well-executed core mechanics. The plot fell flat for me, there are too many unresolved questions and cliffhanger ending with no sequel in sight. I still haven't found the answer to my initial question, where does all this praise come from? The gameplay fails to entertain, it just gives you damage sponges to click on, with no real depth or evolution. As for the story, they didn't even address the questions raised at the very beginning. Where did the machines get their consciousness and why are they imitating humans? To be honest, I don't think this game deserves the hype it gets. Thank you for watching till the end. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. See you in the next one.
Just a little more. Brother.
Doesn't matter how much oil you give him, little guy. You can't make a machine your brother.
Greetings. The Japanese gaming industry has always been a bit of an enigma. For a long time it felt like it was stuck in its own bubble, producing games that seemed strange and overly niche for the foreign market. Yet this industry stood out because of its bold decisions and its refusal to follow Western game design trends. My first real encounter with the Japanese gaming industry started with Dark Souls series, if I'm not mistaken. Since then, I've been sinking deeper and deeper into this swamp. While titles like Dark Souls or Resident Evil have become mainstream and won the hearts of global players, there are games specifically intended for the domestic market. They are unique, so to speak. They often move away from conventional game design, which is why many players quit. They simply can't find familiar mechanics or an understandable plot. Today's game, NieR Automata, is one of those titles, but instead of being ignored it made a massive splash, even though the creator's previous works weren't nearly as popular. At first I thought the hype was just about the character design, specifically 2B's appearance. I assumed it was another hollow game using a beautifully dressed character to attract an audience while offering nothing inside. For a long time I ignored it, but then while listening to Spotify I stumbled upon the soundtrack. It was so captivating that I wanted to know the context in which this music played. I started to wonder, was I wrong initially? Before we dive in, grab something to eat and let's get started. Well, when I launched the game, I had certain expectations regarding the slasher mechanics. Since NieR Automata presents itself as an action slasher game, and I naturally had some questions about the combat system. The player takes control of an android called NieR. Now, even though it's a slasher, the basic light and heavy attacks deal surprisingly little damage. It quickly becomes clear that melee combat is not the core mechanic in the game. Our android deals with enemies primarily through his hacking skills. During this process, the perspective shifts, you control something like a cursor, dodging projectiles and trying to destroy the enemy's core in a digital space. For slasher fans who expect an emphasis on stylish and high-speed combat, it's a significant drawback. Instead of executing complex combos, the game forces you into a bullet hell minigame to deal with your enemies. Of course, I'm not completely fixated on the genre shift. I can accept these new rules if they bring fresh features and unique gameplay situations. If the minigame evolves and challenges me in new ways, it could work. But if it stays the same, it runs the risk of becoming repetitive as the melee combats. So, does this mini-game actually offer any new features? Well, at the beginning it does introduce some obstacles. You'll encounter black blocks that shield the enemy's core, which you must destroy before you can deal any damage. Other enemy cursors also appear, firing back at you and forcing you to dodge while staying on the offensive. Throughout the first half of the game, new projectile patterns continue to appear. However, once you pass the mid-game, the innovation stops. The patterns begin to repeat, and nothing truly new is introduced. What started as a fresh change of pace eventually becomes a repetitive loop. With this shift in genre, the sense of challenge also disappears. What I mean is that, while you're hacking an enemy, your android remains invincible. You won't take any damage in the physical world, unless of course you lose the minigame itself. But since the patterns repeat so frequently, you eventually memorize them all, making it almost impossible to lose. The same issue applies to boss fights. Bosses have significantly more health, requiring you to hack them multiple times to win. Naturally, the more you have to hack, the higher the chance of making a mistake. The hacking patterns during boss encounters are also more complex, which at least provides some level of engagement. I must also mention a brilliant touch. The game's soundtrack seamlessly shifts to an 8-bit version the moment the hacking starts. It's a small detail, but it adds a massive layer of immersion to the whole process, making you feel like you've truly entered the digital realm. Well, speaking of boss fights, the game features massive encounters like Goliath or the Colossal Sea Robot, where the flight unit comes into play. On paper, fighting a boss and a flight unit sounds cool, flying around, dodging waves of projectiles, and unleashing powerful attacks to bring down a giant. In reality, however, these fights are long and not interesting. Before you reach the boss itself, you're forced to fight waves of ordinary enemies with repetitive patterns. Almost every boss fight involving the flight unit follows roughly the same scenario: a massive health bar that you slowly whittle down by aiming at the single point and holding the fire button. Since we're playing as a hacker android, we can simplify our fights. Hacking allows us to bypass the slog and deal massive damage directly to the boss system. This at least offers a different approach, even if hacking becomes the much more preferable option. I should also mention that while the gameplay itself might lack variety, dual stage cutscenes between phases do a great job diluting the monotony and maintaining the cinematic scale. By the way, we also have a pod with ranged attacks, which has a special powerful attack that can be swapped. But it doesn't add anything to the combat system, it just speeds up the fight or helps reach flying enemies. Amidst all this, there is one positive point that stood out to me. While you're playing and moving through certain sections, the camera suddenly shifts angles. So instead of a third-person game, you get a 2D platformer with a side view. Sometimes it even switches to a top-down perspective. It's a pretty interesting mechanic. While it can be inconvenient at times, it at least breaks the monotony. It forces you to look at the world differently and introduces some variety to both exploration and combat. A crucial part of any RPG game is character progression. Those repetitive hacking minigames could have been more varied if the developers had added unique abilities to the hacker cursor. Alternatively, they could have expanded the melee combat into a system built around active skills. There are no character-specific abilities for 9S, aside from the drone's powerful attacks. Instead of an ability-based tree or a traditional RPG upgrade system, we have a unique but flawed method of progression: plug and chips. The android has a limited number of slots that can be expanded over time. You can equip various chips to gain bonuses, which are found everywhere, dropped by bosses, looted from common enemies, or bought from merchants. Each chip takes up a different number of slots depending on its power level. However, these chips provide passive bonuses like a 5% damage boost or a 30% health increase, essentially just a boring stat bump. The most benefit you can squeeze out of this system is reducing a 5-minute fight to 4. It's a missed opportunity. Adding active skills to the hacking minigame could have completely changed the pace and strategy, but instead the mechanics remain stagnant. The chip system in NieR Automata feels more like inventory management than actual character growth. I should probably mention that you're not limited to your starting gear. You can find and switch to different weapons at any time. However, in practice, this feels somewhat pointless. First of all, I managed to beat the game using only the 2 starting weapons. Secondly, as I mentioned before, basic attacks deal so little damage that melee combat feels unnecessary or even inconvenient compared to hacking. This remains true even after upgrading my weapons to the maximum level. On the bright side, there is one major advantage to this system. It eliminates the need for grinding. Even if you find yourself underleveled for a specific location, you don't have to head back and farm experience points for hours. You can simply deal with higher level enemies by hacking them without any major issues. It effectively removes the level gate that usually slows down progression in RPGs. So hacking is a double-edged sword. It makes weapon variety irrelevant, but it saves the player from the most tedious part of any RPG, the endless grind. Now that we've discussed the combat system and character progression, we should talk about what actually motivates you to engage with these mechanics. While the main story is the primary driving force, the game also offers numerous side quests. To be honest, the side quests in NieR Automata are mechanically primitive. They are often monotonous fetch or kill tasks. Go here, grab this, or destroy that in return for a reward. From a gameplay perspective, they are far from mandatory and can easily be skipped. However, while they lack mechanical depth, they excel in narrative depth. Completing these quests is how you truly uncover the lore and the dark nature of this world. For example, there is a quest where an android asks you to find the killer of her friend. As you progress, you discover the shocking truth: the requester is the killer herself. She's an executioner type. In the world of NieR, the YoRHa organization produces androids with specific designations. Our protagonist 9S is an S-type scanner, and 2B is a B-type, that means battler. It turns out there is a hidden darker designation used specifically for hunting down deserters. This quest isn't just a sad story, it teaches you early on that in this world names and types are often lies. These local stories flesh out the world, showing how androids and machines struggled long before you arrived, slowly immersing you in the unsettling reality of their existence. These side quests are scattered across the map, marked by red points. This brings me to one of my biggest issues with the open world. It feels incredibly empty. Aside from these quests, there are no meaningful activities to engage with. Of course, the world is filled with machines that respawn after a while, but it feels more like an annoyance than a challenge. Most of the time you just want to run past them, rather than waste time fighting. It makes me wonder what exactly is supposed to motivate me to explore. Take the desert location, for example. It's massive but completely hollow. There's absolutely nothing to discover and nothing to do once you finish the quests. Yet the story frequently sends you back there several times. Even then you only encounter NPCs who offer a few generic lines and nothing more. I never felt like this world was alive before my arrival. The NPCs are completely static. Every time you encounter them, they're standing in the exact same positions. This creates a strange and frustration paradox. On one hand, you have these well-written side quests that give the world meaning, flesh out the lore, and make you care about the struggles of these machines and androids. They are designed to pull you deep into the story. On the other hand, you have a physical world that constantly fights against that immersion. The massive hollow locations and the static frozen NPCs serve as a constant reminder that you're just playing a game with budget constraints. We've talked about the gameplay, the open world and the side quests, but I haven't said a word about the main story itself. As I mentioned earlier, I originally stumbled upon the game's soundtrack, and I decided to play NieR Automata to find the context behind those songs. A great soundtrack combined with powerful context stays with you far longer than any ordinary track. To give you some background, there was a time when humanity lived peacefully on Earth. Technology advanced to the point where humans created android beings that could think and feel like humans but remained under their creator's control, tasked with their protection. Everything changed when aliens arrived from outer space, intent on exterminating humanity and seizing the planet. They used machine lifeforms as their primary weapon, nearly wiping out the human race. The few survivors fled to the moon, where they established the YoRHa project. The mission was simple but absolute. Send elite combat androids back to Earth to reclaim the planet, destroy the machines and eliminate the alien threat once and for all. To be honest, I thought I understood the main message, but the ending left me slightly confused. The premise is engaging and at a first glance, our goal seems simple, the destruction of mindless machines. However, we soon realize that these machines possess something resembling consciousness, some even become peaceful. Throughout the game, we see them desperately trying to imitate human habits, though their efforts often seem futile. A major revelation occurs when we learn that machines actually exterminated their alien creators a long time ago. Later we encounter a deserter android A2 who betrayed YoRHa for unknown reasons. But strangely, after that brief encounter, she's not even mentioned again. The plot thickness when NieR is kidnapped and subsequently rescued by 2B. While recovering at the YoRHa space station, he decides to infiltrate the central servers and discovers that everything he believed was a lie. As it turns out, there are no survivors on the moon. The YoRHa project was a fabrication created by the androids themselves. They have been broadcasting a signal from the moon to simulate human activity. The commander explains the bitter truth. This lie was necessary to give the androids a god worth dying for. Armed with this devastating information, she leaves NieR to decide for his own what to do next. Finally, we reach the ending. NieR rushes to help 2B in a desperate battle against the machines. The enemy proves too powerful, forcing NieR to use his hacking abilities to bring it down. However, during the process, he becomes infected with a logic virus. Since his corrupted data cannot be synced with the YoRHa station, 2B is forced to kill him. This should have meant that NieR and the truth about the moon would be lost forever. But in a sudden twist, it turns out he transferred his consciousness into a nearby machine life form. He survives, but he chooses to keep the devastating truth from 2B, and the game simply ends. To be honest, it could have been a touching story, but instead it leaves too many threads hanging. The revelation that humanity is extinct is a massive turning point that shocks both NieR and the player. What is the point of this war if the gods don't even exist? Since NieR survived against the odds, what choice will he make now? Will he ever tell 2B the truth? Unfortunately, we don't get any answers. It feels like the story was cut short, leaving us to wait for a sequel that doesn't exist. It's a frustrating conclusion to a journey that was just starting to get interesting. So, what is the final conclusion? In almost every aspect, the gameplay is mediocre. The game tries to offer something unique by shifting genres and introducing flight unit combat, but since these mechanics stop evolving halfway through, the experience quickly outlives itself. The combat presents you with nothing more than damage sponges to click on, lacking any real depth or evolution if you stick to melee. If you prefer hacking, things are slightly better, but only until the mid-game. As for the story, too many questions remain unanswered because the game ends so abruptly. Where did the machines get their consciousness? Why are they so obsessed with imitating humans? And what will happen to the androids now that their god is gone? To be honest, NieR Automata could have been a deeply moving, story-driven masterpiece despite its gameplay flaws, but for now, it is what it is. Thank you for watching until the end. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. See you next time. You know, I caught myself thinking that everything I've analyzed up to this point, the combat system, the progression, the whole world, it suddenly doesn't matter anymore. I was looking for answers, complaining about the ambiguity, and waiting for a grand finale. But the game simply used my own expectations against me. When I first launched NieR Automata, I thought I'd just analyze the gameplay, features, and talk a bit about the plots, like I always do. At first, that's exactly how it went. By the end of my first run, I had formed a fairly negative impression. The combat hadn't evolved, and the story left me with nothing but questions. I didn't understand why it had ended so abruptly, or what the point even was. Then the game offered me a choice, to play through it again, but as a different character, viewing the same story from a different perspective. I thought I was just replaying the game. I didn't realize I was actually just finishing the prologue. After the first two acts, the game begins to put the pieces in their places. Earlier, we could justify every battle as a fight for a great purpose, the salvation of humanity. But now, what is the point of fighting if there is no god worth dying for? For these androids, serving humans was more than just a job. It was their entire meaning of life, their only reason to wake up in a dead world. When 9S learns the truth, he chooses to keep it a secret. He doesn't tell 2B or the other androids because he knows the truth is a weapon that would shatter their fragile existence. It's impossible to predict what an army would do once they realize their god is gone. But even knowing the truth, 9S doesn't lose it right away. He still has one last reason to keep going, and that's 2B. In a way, she replaces the whole humanity for him. There's this underlying feeling that he was obsessed with her. He loved her, he wanted her physically, but he never said a word. When she's gone, all that unspoken love and desire just turns into pure rage. He needed a new goal after her death. He chose to destroy all machines for all the pain caused. While 9 is burning everything down, we see the other side of the coin with A2. This is the character we barely saw for 5 minutes in the first 2 acts. But now she becomes the complete opposite of 9S. When she meets the peaceful machines, she's skeptical. But sometime and events later, she accepts the fact that machines can be kind and harmless. When the virus hits and the machines turn on the peaceful ones, A2 tries to step in and help. It doesn't end well, but it leads her to a massive realization. There is no reason to keep fighting them. She sees that machines are just like androids. They are just beings who chose to ignore their programming and stop the war. This all builds up to a final confrontation between 2 opposite worlds. On one side, you have an android completely broken by the meaninglessness of his life, desperate to destroy everything in his path. On the other hand, you have A2, a survivor who has known the truth about humanity and the dark purpose of YoRHa for a long time. But unlike 9S, her cynicism didn't turn into a desire to destroy the world. It turned into a weary determination to end the cycle. To her, the tower is the ultimate symbol of the machine threat, a weapon aimed at what's left of the android's world. She doesn't fight because she believes in the mission anymore, she fights because she's the only one left who can stop the slaughter. This is what makes the final choice so difficult. We see 2 victims of the same lie reacting in opposite ways. One wants to burn it all down, the other just wants the fire to go out. If you choose A2, she manages to subdue 9S and tasks her pod with saving his life. She stays behind to bring the tower down from the inside. Whether she knew it was a weapon or a ship carrying the machine's legacy doesn't change her resolve. By destroying the structure, she effectively terminates what's left of the war and Project YoRHa itself. In those final moments, she doesn't find the victory, she finds the silence and peace she's been searching for since her own squad was sacrificed years ago. But if you side with 9S, the story reaches its absolute emotional rock bottom. The final clash ends in mutual destruction. Both of them deliver fatal blows to each other. As 9S lies dying on the ground, bleeding out next to A2, his fading consciousness connects to the machine network. It is only in these final moments, as the tower prepares to launch, that the truth is revealed. It's not a weapon aimed at the moon, it's an ark. The machine having realized the futility of the war, or leaving Earth behind to find a new home among the stars. Inside his dying mind, 9S is met by Adam, who offers him a choice to let his consciousness join them on the ark or to fade away. Whether he chooses to leave his grief behind or die on a silent planet, both choices feel heavy and tragic. Both of these endings feel final. They feel like the end of a long, exhausting war. But as the credits start to roll, the pods that accompanied us throughout the entire journey suddenly step in. It doesn't matter which path you took, the pods decide they are not satisfied with such a tragic ending for these characters. Their original purpose was simple: collect data, monitor the androids, and ensure the final stage of Project YoRHa, the total destruction of every unit. But this time, something went wrong with their programming. They became attached to the very androids they were supposed to watch die. After you've seen every ending and felt every bit of that despair, the pods offer you one last chance. Not as a character, but as a player. They ask you, do you want to save them? By the time I finished the game, I'd grown attached to 2B, 9S, and A2. I didn't want to accept their tragic deaths, so I took the offer. Suddenly, the credits stop and the hacker cursor appears. We take control, but now our enemies are the names of the developers themselves. At first it's easy, but soon the names get bigger and the screen is so covered in projectiles that it's almost impossible to dodge. You will die again and again. After every failure, the game mocks you, asking if you want to surrender, even provoking you to admit that games are just silly things. But the desire to save these characters is stronger than the provocation. Then the game offers help from other players. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't do it alone. That's when it hit me. You can handle the weight of the world by yourself. It's only by uniting for a common goal that we can resist anything. This moment of connection is even highlighted by the music as soon as you accept help. A mesmerizing chorus joins the background, and you realize you're not alone anymore. After winning, we see the consequences of our choice. We saved them. They finally have a chance at life. They no longer have a great purpose or a god worth dying for, but they have something better. The right to start from scratch. Maybe now they can find a meaning of life that is truly their own, not something imposed by a program. The final chord of this entire epic is the offer to erase your saves. You see, saving the androids comes with a price. I wouldn't have been able to beat the credits and save them if it hadn't been for the help of other players who sacrificed their own progress to save mine. Now the same choice is in my hands. Do I want to sacrifice my time and everything I've achieved for a player I don't even know? Someone I might even hate, or someone who will never even be able to thank me? And I'm okay with that, because in a world that feels so hollow and meaningless, this act of helping a stranger is the only thing that actually matters.
All of your data has been deleted.
And so, we must say goodbye. I feel a slight amount of sadness.
It is time for the final words.
Affirmative.
To all of you who spent time with this game, thank you.